So now that you're getting ready for the test, one of the things you have to remember is that we really only learned how to solve one type of problem, right? Everything we've looked at is solve this. We've learned 4 different methods for doing it, but it was always the same question. So we're going to go through all the methods that we learned so far, and this one side of one paper is going to give you a full review. So it's going to seem like a lot. Just remember we took a whole month to get here, though. It wasn't like a very short process. So let's start here with what is A, what is B, and what is C. So like here we got, that's a -1, this is a -6, and this is a -5. So your A is going to be -1, B is -6, and C is -5. Now, from looking at A, remember that's where you find out how it opens. And looking at C is how you figure out the y-intercept. So A is -1, so therefore it opens down. And the y-intercept, or I mean the C equals -5, therefore the y-intercept is 0, -5. So the C and the y-intercept here are always the same. And how do we get out the opens up, opens down? Where did that come from? How do we know it's down? It's negative, right? A is negative. So if A is negative, it opens down, and if A was positive, then it would have opened up. -1, so it opens down. Is the vertex going to be a min or a max? Right. Opening down, is the vertex on the top of the graph or on the bottom? You just have to visualize it. So if the graph is opening down like this, the vertex is a max. It's at the top, maximum. So these two always came in pairs. If it opened down, it was a max. If it opened up, it was a min. You'll never have an opening up with a maximum or opening down with a minimum. These always come in these two pairs. So if you know one, you know the other, regardless of which one you get first. Then we have a quadratic formula. We have -b plus or minus square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. And again, this is comprised of 2 smaller formulas. The -b over 2a, which is the vertex. That's these two, -b over 2a. And then we also have the discriminant. And that tells you the number, how many solutions. Okay, so let's find vertex using both methods that you learned. So I'm going to use a -b over 2a, x equals -b over 2a. Right. Plug in our two values here, b and a. So we have negative, and use parentheses here if you want to catch the double negatives, over 2 times -1. Right. Then we have negative is 6, and 2 times -1 is -2. So 6 over -2 is -3. So that let me know the x-coordinate, right? X equals, the x-coordinate of the vertex is -3. And to get the y-coordinate, we plug -3 back into the original equation to get y. And y equals -1 times -3 squared, okay, minus 6 times -3, have minus 5. We have negative 3 times negative 3. We're going to do the order of operations correctly. I have to multiply negative 3 times negative 3. That's 9. 9 times negative 1 is negative 9. We'll have plus 18. Negative 6 and negative 3 is plus 18. And then minus 5. And then we just simplify this. Negative 9 plus 18 is 9, and 9 minus 5 is 4. So I know the vertex is at negative 3, comma 4. Negative 3, comma 4. I know this is the vertex. I know it's opening down. Right. So that was one way to get the vertex. Now, this method always works. Okay, that's the nice thing about this. It might take a while, but this method for the vertex always works. But there was the vertex form, which worked most of the time because I gave you the nice number, so we'll do that. And here's what we did there. First step was to start from here, and just like we just did on the quadratic formula part, take out the negative, take out whatever number's in front, take that out. Right? And we're left with, I can divide each of those by negative 1, that's x squared. Negative 6 divided by negative 1 is positive 6. Negative 5 divided by negative 1 is positive. Then complete the square. This is just a little bit more. Set it all up. Half of 6 is 3. 3 squared is 9. And to get to 5, we have to minus 4. And lastly, multiply that negative we took out in the beginning, multiply it back in. And we have negative x plus 3, sign stays the same inside. Negative on the outside. But here I have negative 1 times negative 4, so positive 4. And from here, the vertex is negative 3, 4. So the big idea for this assignment is that regardless of what method you use, you must get the same answers. Right? So if you use negative b over 2a, you get negative 3, 4. If you use the vertex form, you get negative 3, 4. Just remember the vertex form, the sign is the opposite on the inside just for the x. So if this is a positive 3, the vertex is at negative 3. But and the sign for this stays the same. For the y, so it's the same. So either way, you get the same answer. Then we finally got into graphing. Alright, so we started with, we knew the center of the graph was negative 3, 4, so we always put the vertex in the center of the table. And then we picked a number bigger and smaller. Right? So I pick a number smaller, negative 4, and bigger, negative 2, and those would have the same answer. Also, I can do another one, take a number smaller, negative 5, and negative 1, and those would have the same answer because of symmetry. So I really only had to plug in one of the two blues right here to figure out the answer, and one of the two reds right here to figure out the answer, and I'd have all of them. So you should go with the smaller one. And you have a choice. You can plug it in either to the original, right here, or the vertex form. But the vertex form is a lot easier to plug into. So I'm going to use the vertex form. Could use the standard form as well. So let's plug in negative 2. So we have two of them. And one of them, I'm going to plug in -2. -2 into this one. And then the second one, I'm going to plug in -1. And get both of those answers. Just like before, remember you do order of operations correctly. You want to do this part first, and then multiply it by -1. Do not distribute in that negative. Do the exponent, parentheses, exponent, then multiply. So 3 minus 2 is 1. 1 squared is 1. And then the negative outside will be -1 plus 4. 4 minus 1 is 3. So if I plug in -2, I get an answer of 3. I know this is an answer, but so is this. -2, 3 is an answer, and so is its counterpart in symmetry. Well, on the other side, it's going to be the same number. And then do the same thing for plugging in -1. So -1 squared, 3 minus 1 is 2. 2 times 2 is 4 with a negative out front. So that's -4, and then the plus 4 just comes down. And 4 minus 4 is 0. So I know that's 0, so is that. So -50 is an answer, and so is -10. And that is the first method we learned on how to find the solutions to a quadratic equation. It was to graph it, right? And the solutions were, where does the graph cross the x-axis? And so there's two answers here, -5 and -1. Those are the two answers. And there are several directions. Just remember that solutions were the same thing, or solve. They ask you to solve it or find the solutions. They're asking for the x-intercepts. So it's a graphical answer. Like if you graphed it, what would it look like? Where would it cross on the x-axis? Right here. And if it crossed 2 times, 1 time, or not at all. So that was the first method. Then we looked at the discriminant. So find the discriminant, verify you get the same number of solutions you see on the graph. So you can see we have 2 solutions here, right? There's 2 answers. They're -5 and -1. Now, since there's 2 answers, we know that the discriminant will come out to be positive. So positive discriminant meant 2 solutions. If we got a 0 for the discriminant, that meant there's 1 solution. And if we got a negative discriminant, that would be a no solution, no answer. It's still, you can graph it, but there's just no x-intercept. So don't forget, no solution doesn't mean there's no graph, it just means there's no x-intercepts. So looking at this, seeing I have 2 solutions, I expect when I calculate the discriminant to have 2 answers. If we go through and verify it, what is b squared minus 4ac, we should get a positive number. So again, here's our A, B, and C, -1, -6, and -5, expecting a positive answer. -6 squared minus 4, -1, minus -5. We did this in 2 steps. Figure out what this part is, which is the easy step, but then figure out what -4 times, all 4 numbers, including the negative, figure out what that equals, and then do the difference. We have -6 times -6, which is positive 36. Negative times negative, positive. -4 times -1 times -5. -20. And 36 minus 20 equals a positive 16. And again, for this, the number didn't really matter. It's the fact that I got a positive is what I'm looking for. Positive means two solutions. And what we already knew was going to happen because graphically we knew the answer was -5 and -1 before starting. So the biggest picture here is making sure everything agrees with one another. If you get two solutions on the graph, you already know that there's going to be a positive discriminant. And then more importantly, you already know from the way you're going to solve it next that all of the methods, if you're doing the same problem, must come out to be the same answer. So since I got this right here, I already know if I solve it by factoring between the square and the quadratic formula, I better get the same exact answers, otherwise something is wrong. So that's the big picture. We do have some people that will solve, they'll get -5, -1 here, but then they'll complete the square. They'll have two other answers, and they'll circle it and say, okay, I'm done. It's like you're missing the big point that you can't have a different answer for the same question doing it a different way. All right, so let's do the factoring first. That was one of the first methods we learned. So let's take the original. We'll start it here. -x squared minus 6x minus 5. And when you're solving, remember if you're solving anything, it means always make it equal to 0. And the equal 0, why is it equal 0? Because of this right here. We don't want to know what happens at -1. We don't want to know what happens at +1. We want to know what happens at 0. That's the ground level. That's the x-intercept. Whenever you're solving, it's always equal to 0 because those are the intercepts. Now, just like the complete the square, first step is if there's something in front, we got it out of the way. Get that out. This will look familiar. So just have this with the vertex one. Here's where we ask ourselves, what two numbers multiply to a times c, 5 times 1 which is 5, and add to b, 6. You have to add to the b and multiply to a times c. Make sure you do the a times c as well, not just the c, but those two multiply together. Right, so we got two numbers that work, which are 5 and 1. Right, 5 times 1 multiplies to 5, and then 5 plus 1 adds to 6. We got plus 5 and plus 1. Now, when there was an a here, other than 1, like this was a 2x squared or 3x squared, that's when you had to do the whole box. Okay, but since there is no number here except 1, you don't have to do that part. We'll get the same answer here. Okay. Now, just like before, if there's a number in front, you can just divide that out because the other side is 0, so it just cancels out really. We don't have to worry about anything we have in front of us. You see that might be sitting there. Just, in fact, cancels out, doesn't matter. For as far as your roots, does not matter. And then once we have this, we said, okay, what plus 5 equals 0, and what plus 1. And solve both of those. And sometimes they're easy like this, other times you have to divide as well and get a fraction answer. It's okay to have fractions. But notice how we get the same two answers as we did on the graph. -5 and -1, that's what x equals. Now when I'm doing x equals this and x equals this, that's when I use these type of phrases. If I'm doing like a vertex, that's where I use parentheses. So if you go back up here, you'll notice this was x equals -3, but y equals 4, so I use parentheses. So know the difference of when I'm using the braces. When I'm using parentheses, they're not interchangeable. You want to use the proper one. Just remember, use parentheses with anything that you graph. So you actually graph -3, 4, right here. So we need the parentheses. So that was the first method. Then we learned the complete the square method. Actually, then you learn vertex form. And to complete the square, you're actually, the first part of it is to do the vertex form, is to do this. So we actually already started completing the square with the vertex form, so I'm going to use that exact same spot where we left off. I'm going to rewrite that. So that -x plus 3 squared plus 4. And set it equal to 0. And then I just have to solve this. The only thing I changed was I added equals 0, because anytime you are solving, that equals 0. So subtract 4 on both sides. Negative x plus 3 squared equals -4. This is -1 right here. So like before, like we did on this side over here, let's just divide by -1. That cancels it out. That cancels out the negative over negative here. So now I have x plus 3 equals +4. Put the square root of both sides. X plus 3 equals, and the square root of 4 is +4 minus 2. Make sure you got the plus or minus part in there. That's key. And then we can subtract 3 on both sides. So our answers are -3 plus 2 and -3 minus 2. So we get an answer of -3 minus 2 is -5. And -3 plus 2 is -1. And here's the biggest thing that you possibly get out of this, is that these match. So completing the square, factoring, and graphing must have the same answer. If you got something else, you'd have to go back and find what the mistake is. Lastly is the quadratic formula. I highly suggest using parentheses when you plug everything in, because the number one mistake is actually messing up on negatives, which will be avoided if you just are using the parentheses. I'll go over to it. Of course, you want to have this formula memorized. It's not going to be given to you on the test, so you have to know it. So you use your A, B, and C from above. Again, A is -1, B is -6. There's 2 of those, right? There's 2 B's in the formula. Here and here. There's 2 A's in the formula, here and here. And the last number, C, is the last number in the formula. So the B's are -6 and -6. A's are -1 and -1. And the C is -5. Now, we already did up here, right? We already did the discriminant. We found out it equals +16. We already figured out what b squared minus 4ac is. So you can be careful and see negative times negative is +6. This whole thing we already calculated up here at +16, so square root of 16, all divided by -2. So both with the completing the square and the quadratic formula, we already had part of it done. So it's actually a little less than you might think. That formula usually takes a little longer. And again, square root of 16 is 4. And then we have two answers. One with a positive, one with a negative. 6 plus 4 divided by negative 2. That's 10 over negative 2. That equals negative 5. And then we have 6 minus 4. That's 2 divided by negative 2. That equals negative 1. And of course, we must get the same answer as we got with the other 3 methods. Okay. So at any time they don't match, you have to fix one or more of one of them so they all match. And all 4 methods we learned. And after doing this a while, you're going to find out, because of the types of problems I gave you, you're going to recall, how come we have 4 different methods for doing the exact same thing? So you recall that the quadratic formula, this always works. Okay? This always works, no matter what, but it's also the longest. So if you try to do every problem using the quadratic formula, it just takes you forever. And there's more calculations here, so there's more things that could go wrong. There's no graph involved here. Completing the square is nice because it gives you the vertex. So if you're asked to find the vertex and solve, you actually do both. Right? Completing the square is the fastest and best way because a quadratic formula does not give you what the vertex is, whereas this one tells you, oh yeah, the vertex is at negative 3, 4, and I get the 2 solutions. There's a lot more information for graphics. Factoring is the fastest. Right? Well, what multiplies a 5 and adds a 6? 5 and 1, or 5 and 1, negative 5, negative 1. Takes 2 seconds, but remember, it doesn't always work. You can get prime here. If the answers are decimals, or if there are no answers, you get primes. So while factoring is the fastest method, it doesn't always work. If you have decimal answers or no answer, you can't get anything from factoring. And of course, you have graphical method, which is nice because if you're actually graphing something going up into the air and falling back down to the ground, this is what will show you where will it go, what flight path will it take. It's launching from here, it's landing here. So anything that goes up in the air and comes back down always follows a parabolic curve, right? So things go up in the air, and sometimes we want to know where they land before we actually launch this thing. And so graphing has its own practical uses as well. Okay, so this is one problem. You have the rest of the time, which is about an hour, to do 3 of them. Okay, and I will tell you, the other ones will have 1 solution, 2 solutions, or no solutions, so you can see and remind yourself what happens, because some of these methods don't work if you have no solutions. You got to look at it and say, oh, why do we need graphing in this? Like, oh yeah, if you have no solution, only quadratic formula and graphing really work. You can't factor it. You can't do that. What happens if you have 1 solution? Things like that. You're going to piece this all together to remember how all this stuff works. Okay. On the test, just so you know, some of them will tell you solve by completing the square. Some will say solve by factoring. But if they just say solve in general, you get to pick what method you want. But you want to be able to pick the one that's appropriate. If it tells you to solve and it's super easy, hey, you want to do it factoring. But if it's a solve and it's a prime, you might want to try complete the square or quadratic formula. So you want to get good at deciding which method to use and when, and don't just rely on, you know what, I'm just going to do quadratic formula for all the problems. That way I'll always get it. You will not have enough time to complete your test because you're doing the longest method for every question. So do not set your eyes on one method and say, I'm going to do only that. You definitely want to get to learn all of them. Okay, that's it for me. I'll be walking around help you guys out as needed. You will get fractions on some of these, so be okay with that if it pops up. Don't be alarmed, it's okay. Do not convert into decimals, it'll make things harder. Keep them as fractions.